little girl, I was only really about 5 or 6 years old. My parents took me to the famed Dia de los Muertos event at the Hollywood Forever Cemetery. It was genuinely one of the best nights of my life. I was surrounded by my culture in a way that I never had been before. All around me, there were stunning folklorico dancers. I got my face painted like a calavera, and I met and got a book signed by my favorite author at the time. I was ecstatic. Any kid would be. I got my favorite Mexican candies in egregious amounts. I was in a pretty dress, and I was spending time with my family. I was content. And though I didn't know it at the time, this would be one of the final nights I would recall spending this way. This would be my final night I would spend before my treasure box would be buried. Ever since I was a little girl, I've heard the saying time and time again, you are what you make of yourself. And in certain aspects, I absolutely agree. At the end of the day, I can only control myself. And I've heard every iteration of these words. For me, old sayings, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me, to inspirational quotes on my social media feeds. I can only control myself, so why would what anyone else says or does hurt me? Why would any of what anyone else says or does hurt me? No, I'm not quite so independent and carefree. At the end of the day, I am a people's person. So if I am not me, who am I? I once read a poem in my Spanish class, basically saying that we are what made us. Everything that we are is a consequence of our parents and our parents' parents and so on and so forth. Si has perdido tu pasado, ¿dónde está tu porvenir? Which translates to, if you have lost your past, where is your future? I too once lost my past, and in that, nearly lost my future. Before I buried myself, I used to spend my summers outside. I would go camping, swimming. Before my treasure box was buried, I would let my parents braid ribbons into my hair. Before my treasure box was buried, I would dance and sing with my cousins at parties. I don't recall these memories too well, but looking back on photos, I looked happy. Looking back on photos, I wish I had stayed that way. But I was raised in a culture that was not my own, and always felt so isolated because of it. From the moment I developed a sense of self-perception, I hated everything that was different about me. From the tan in my skin, to the black shock in my hair, the different slopes of my nose and my defined cheekbones. And I wasn't the only one who thought of myself in this manner, as so many of my peers were so quick to point out that I looked different. Though not malicious at first, things quickly got out of hand, and with it, my entire self-perception shifted. Why wasn't I born with big, bright eyes? Why did I have tan skin where there should have been pale skin? Why did I have black hair when my peers did not? It wasn't fair. I didn't want to be different. I wanted to be like them. I wanted to be beautiful. So at the ripe age of 9, I began to kill off little pieces of myself in order to fit the mold of who I thought I wanted to be. It was around this time that I began to cut off everything I knew and everything I loved and traded it for the shreds of approval that my peers would spare me. They knew my name, but it didn't matter to their tongues in the slightest, as I hid everything I was from them because I didn't feel comfortable enough to make a home outside of my own blood and bone. I stayed inside trying to keep as pale as I could. I tried to gouache on my face to match the faces of my peers. I begged to dye my hair a different color outside of my unsightly black. I unlearned and disregarded my native tongue. I stopped eating the foods that I had grown up with. And I learned to hate what made me, me. I begged and I pleaded and I prayed, please, 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 just let me be like them. Even with this, I was not, and never would be, good enough. No, I could never be good enough. In their eyes, I would always be labeled as other. I could bleach my hair all I wanted, I could use skin whitening treatments, I could tear myself to shreds and sew myself back together as something entirely new, but I would never be good enough to change the fundamentals of who I am. And my body burned and withered with the shame of not belonging. Middle school proved to be the height of this difficulty, and to this day I wonder how anyone could be so cruel to someone, especially a child. When the peak of this brutality occurred, I returned home later that day, scared and hurt, with a busted lip and twin rivers of blood seeping from my nose. And even worse yet, I convinced myself that I deserved it. I convinced myself that I was a doll with pieces of me torn out and missing. I convinced myself that I was not made to be loved, that somewhere deep down inside of me there was something so fundamentally broken and damaged within me that no amount of praying or perfecting could fix what was wrong. In reality, I was not, and never was, broken. The sole factor keeping me stagnant in life was believing in the very notion that I had to be fixed, that this was all I was capable of, that I was nothing more than a drop of color for diversity, the statistic you proudly boast to prove your progressiveness. I was nothing more than a miserable number. Even despite this, I convinced myself that I was happy where I was, that people liked me enough to be around me. I convinced myself that my friends were real. Real friends don't leave you beaten and bruised on the bathroom floor. So when high school rolled around, my parents pulled me out, kicking and screaming and crying. I had convinced myself that I was happy where I was after all. As much as I hated it at the time, I think my parents' decision to pull me out saved me. It was here at North Hollywood that I began to reforge a new key to my treasure box. When I came here, I was angry and sad and nervous. I was very much so the quintessential no sabo kid, and everyone I met could practically smell it on me. Once again, I was marked as other, but this time, things weren't so bad. One final time, I had to give up everything I knew, but not everything I loved. And my life turned on its axis. I was uncomfortable, I lost friends, and any perception of me being liked completely fell out of the window. It didn't matter. In the end, the people who were meant for me were on the other side of this blockage. I'm no longer liked by many, but I am loved by few. And on these grounds, I have made my first real friend and learned to distinguish people who love me versus people who love my loved. I swallowed my pride and downloaded apps to relearn Spanish, even as my tongue still trips on the words that I do not know. I not only eat the foods that I grew up with, but I cook them too now. I go to quinces and I dance and I sing my heart out, whereas only a few short years ago, I would sit in a chair and watch my life pass me by. As I have gotten older, I still feel like a baby learning to walk. With this, I'll take a few steps and fall down and get up and do it all over again. In this life, I've encountered far too many of the atrocities that this world has to offer, especially at my young age, and I've experienced things that I don't wish upon anyone, not even my worst enemy. However, in this same life, I've experienced such incredible joys and wonders, and to me, at least, life is like a rose deep within a bush of thorns. And there's a poem that I'd like to read by Gregory Orr that reflects everything I've known of this reality. And yet I swear I love this earth, that scars and scalds, that burns my feet. And even hell is holy. And this poem just reminds me that life can be so beautiful, yet so atrocious. But I think such is the nature of life. We're all just children learning all of the time, even the adults. For me at least, I'm still learning how to love. What's the saying? When you have not been fed love on a silver spoon, you learn to lick it off of knives. I'm learning. How to hold and how to be held, how to speak and how to listen, how to love and how to be loved. In all of this, I'm equally comforted and disturbed by the fact that there's a community of us. How many of us have our feet in two separate cultures without quite being in one or the other? How many of us fidget nervously when asked the question, "Where are you from?" How many of us spend our nights awake wondering, "Who am I?" The answer is far too many of us. So to this I plead, please know that there is not an ounce of shame in being both. There's nothing wrong with being in the in-between. Never be ashamed of your native tongue, and even more so, don't be ashamed of not being able to speak it with perfect ease. We will all have our different experiences, from those of us who are teased for our ethnic features, to those of us who are harassed on the daily for the color in our skin, and even those of us who have encountered no such brutality. We can find unity and beauty in the mix that is our dual cultures. Learn who you are, from your past to your present. Honor your ancestors and their rich culture, while paving the way for future generations, if only so that they do not have to suffer the same heartache that we had to. The world can be a cruel place, so we shouldn't be. This year, I'll return to the Hollywood Forever Cemetery. This year, I'll learn to dance Folklorico. This year, I'll paint the faces of the kids that I was once a part of and pray that they don't forget who they are the way that I did. And this is where I believe the treasure to life is, The treasure to life is not any material object, nor is it one singular thing. The treasure to life is love. So one final time, ask the question, who am I? I can't tell you who you are, but I can lend you a map to try and figure it out. Thank you.